Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to talk about Arlen Specter, senator from Pennsylvania for 30 years who died recently at the age of 82. Senator Specter had an important influence on our country politically, which most of the obituaries went into. But since this is a historical show rather than a political show, we're going to concentrate on the historical importance of Arlen Specter. So the majority of the show will be taken up with a discussion of Arlen Specter, the John F. Kennedy assassination on November 22nd, 1963, and the magic bullet. But before we get into that, let's just talk a little bit about his background. Arlen Specter was a nice Jewish boy from Wichita, Kansas, who moved to Pennsylvania and Philadelphia when he was 5 years old. Here he talks about growing up and moving to Philadelphia during the Depression.
Do you remember much about the Depression or the idea of the Depression? You remember hearing people talking about it?
I remember a lot about the Depression. I remember that 1935, when I was 5 years old, our family pulled up stakes in Wichita and moved to Philadelphia so that we could live with my father's sister. In those days, when there was a depression and people had a tough time to make a living, they would move in with a family. Well, we had no family in Kansas. We actually came to Philadelphia. My father at that time did not have a car. He had a pickup truck, which meant there was a cab where 3 people could ride and a flatbed iron truck, and he would put some wooden posts up in a tarpaulin, and Hilda Shirley and I rode in the back seat. Kind of a rough ride from Wichita to Philadelphia.
Well, that's the background of Arlen Specter. As I said, he was in the Senate from Pennsylvania for 30 years, and for a while he was the most important senator in the United States. He started out as a Democrat during his young years in Philadelphia, but when he was elected to the Senate, he was elected as a Republican. Late in his career, when President Obama was elected and there were 59 Democrats in the Senate, Arlen Specter switched from being a Republican to a Democrat, and this got a lot of press and a lot of publicity all over the country because it gave the Democrats basically a filibuster-proof majority, and this is what the obituaries reported on Arlen Specter. Here's CNN.
Facing almost certain defeat from a more conservative opponent in the Republican 2010 primary, Specter did the unthinkable.
As the Republican Party has moved farther and farther to the right, I have found myself increasingly at odds with the Republican philosophy.
He switched parties, becoming a Democrat. He won President Obama's endorsement.
I'm thrilled to have Arlen, the Democratic caucus,
incurring the wrath of many home state voters.
He helped President Obama get some legislation through, but the switch didn't help him because he lost anyway in 2010. He had his greatest effect as a senator during the Supreme Court hearings for Robert Bork, who he opposed, and Clarence Thomas, who he reluctantly supported, and his questioning of Thomas' subordinate Anita Hill became front-page news.
You are not now drawing a conclusion that Judge Thomas sexually harassed you.
Yes, I am drawing that conclusion. That
so
is
then I don't understand.
Pardon me?
Then I don't understand.
Ms. Hill claimed that Justice Thomas harassed her before he became a Supreme Court justice, and that was a sticking point in his nomination, but his support from Arlen Specter was critical in getting through the Senate process.
Did you find yourself to be the focus of a lot of media attention because of your questioning of Anita Hill, and did that surprise you?
I did find myself to be the focus of a lot of media attention. No, it did not surprise me. This was a big matter. This was a nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States. You had a man who was 43 years old. He was African American. He was being nominated to replace Thurgood Marshall, and he had the prospect of serving a very long time. Man whose views did not coincide with mine as to social policy. How that would affect him on the court, I do not know. And we had a young woman who would step forward, testify, bring certain facts forward to the public, very stark, and had attracted a lot of attention. Later, I was told people were watching it around the world in very different time zones, but this was something that they were riveted to, and people still are. Was I surprised that there was this tremendous amount of attention and focus of attention? No.
Well, that's what most of the obituaries concentrated on with Arlen Specter. but historically his importance goes back way before that, to 1963 when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. After the assassination, President Johnson appointed a commission to investigate the assassination headed by Chief Justice Earl Warren, and Arlen Specter was a young staffer on that commission. He developed one of the critical and most contentious findings of the Warren Commission. Kennedy was killed with a shot to the head, with the third shot fired by Lee Harvey Oswald, and most experts believe that the first shot missed. The question is, what happened with the second shot? We know that Kennedy was hit in the throat, and we know that Connally was hit in the chest with a bullet that went through his chest, went into his wrist, and ultimately into his thigh. Were they the same bullet? Was the second bullet the bullet that hit both Kennedy and Connally? Specter said that they were hit by the same bullet that traversed Kennedy's throat and went into Connally's chest. Here he is talking about in 1964.
Possibility of one bullet having inflicted the wounds on both the president's neck and the governor's body came in a very gradual way. For example, the first insight was given when Dr. Humes testified based on his autopsy findings. And at that time, it was made clear for the first time that the bullet that went through the president's neck hit no bone, hit no solid muscle. According to Dr. Humes, came out with great velocity. Now, it was at that juncture that we wondered for the first time what happened to the bullet. Where did the bullet go? The probability is that it went into Governor Connally because it struck nothing else in the car. That is the single most convincing piece of evidence that the one bullet hit both men, because looking down the trajectory, as I did through Oswald's own rifle, and others did too, the trajectory was such that it was almost certain that the bullet which came out of the president's neck with great velocity would have had to have hit either the car or someone in the car.
Well, it's safe to say not everybody agreed with that. After the Warren Commission was published, conspiracists dubbed this the magic bullet theory because they didn't believe the trajectory of the bullet, or the pristine bullet theory because the bullet, when it was discovered, was not deformed in a way they thought was consistent with the injury. Little more than a decade later, the House Committee on Assassinations investigated the Kennedy assassination again, and 8 of the 9 doctors on the committee agreed with the single bullet theory, but one didn't, and that was Pittsburgh forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht. Here is Wecht from the documentary The Mock Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, which we referred to when we did the podcast on James Hosty, with Jerry Spence interrogating Wecht as the defense lawyer for Oswald, and Vincent Bugliosi cross-examining him as the prosecutor.
Dr. Cyril Wecht, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm a pathologist specializing in anatomic, clinical, and forensic pathology.
Thank you. Would you tell the folks whether or not you were part of the President's, the House Committee's panel?
Yes, I was, Mr. Spence, one of the 9 forensic pathologists who had been convened by the Select Committee of Assassinations by the House of Representatives.
Why is everybody concerned? Just explain as briefly as you can why everybody's concerned about whether there was one shot that went through both the president and Governor Connally, or 2 shots. I mean, what possible difference does it make? Explain.
The reason for the problem was this. They got the alleged murder weapon, this Mannlicher Carcano single-action, non-automatic weapon, and it was determined that in the hands of the most skilled marksman that the government could find, it took 2.3 seconds from shot to shot. They then looked at the Zapruder film, and they saw when Kennedy was hit the first time, then when Connally was hit, and they determined that there was only a lapse of time somewhere between 1/2 to 1.5 seconds. So it was then humanly impossible. They had already made the commitment to themselves that it was a sole assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. They then had to find a way to fit all that in. The way they found was the so-called single bullet theory, which we prefer to refer to as the magic bullet theory. That is the theory that holds that the same bullet that went through the president's back and out his neck re-entered Connally's back, went through his chest, broke his rib, exited from the front of his chest, re-entered the back of his wrist, caused a comminuted or shattered fraction of the distal end of the radius, the heavy, bent, dense bone that comes from the elbow to the wrist, exited from the front of the wrist, re-entered the left thigh, fell out of the left thigh, was not noticed by anybody until a few hours afterwards at Parkland Hospital when a maintenance man was trying to get to the men's room, found his way blocked by stretchers from the emergency room, moved the stretcher, and lo and behold, there was Commission Exhibit 399, the magic bullet. Without the single bullet theory, there has to be more than one person shooting. I'm not talking about who or what.
Without their believing in the single bullet theory, the time won't work out. Is that it?
That's it, exactly. The President and Mrs. Kennedy, Governor Connally, Mrs. Connally, these are jump seats in the rear compartment of the car. Greer and Kellerman, the Secret Service agents. This is a simple schematic illustration to demonstrate how a bullet would have been moving if it had been fired from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository building. It would have been coming from up downward. It would have been coming from right to left and from rear to front. The bullet entered the back of President Kennedy, and then it moved to the front, and it moved to the left, and it exited from the midline of his neck. That bullet did not strike any dense bone. There was nothing to deflect it whatsoever, nothing to alter its path. It was traveling at approximately 2,000 feet per second muzzle velocity. When it exited from the front of the president's throat, it would have continued in a straight line. There is simply no way possible for that bullet to have entered Governor Connally's posterior right axillary area, which is a fancy medical way for saying behind the right armpit. If it hit him behind the right armpit, it would have had to have come out of the president's neck and in some way veered back to the right and then stopped and turned around and started once again in a path toward the left. Bullets do not react that way, not even in comic books. What this shows is a composite of several bullets. Bullets that were fired in an experiment conducted under the auspices and at the direction of the Warren Commission in 1964 at an Army base in Maryland near Washington, D.C. They fired 6.5 millimeter copper-jacketed lead-core military-type ammunition first into cotton wadding, striking nothing.
Same as this gun. Same ammunition as out of this.
Exact same ammunition and from the same kind of weapon. Not Oswald's weapon, but another Mannlicher Carcano. These two bullets were fired into cotton wadding, striking nothing. Notice the deformity at the base. This bullet went through a goat carcass, breaking one rib of a goat. Notice its widening. It even looks like a different bullet, but it's the same ammunition. That deformity is caused by the impact against one rib of a goat. And notice the extrusion of the lead core at the base. This bullet went through the wrist of a human cadaver, breaking the radius of a human cadaver, the same bone that was broken in Governor Connally. In other words, they wanted to simulate, to reproduce the fractures that had occurred in the governor. So this one was to simulate the rib fracture, and this one was to simulate the wrist fracture. And over here, a little off the screen, is Commission Exhibit 399, the so-called stretcher bullet, which, according to the government's theory, broke both the rib and the wrist in Governor Connally, but emerged in near pristine condition, the only slight deformity at the base, otherwise the bullet completely intact. And yet here are the results of their experiment, and they chose the sample or representative bullets. I did not choose them.
That was Spence. This is Bugliosi.
Cyril, I respect you. Even though from a professional perspective you don't think too much of the autopsy surgeons, you do agree 100% with their findings, to wit, that the bullet wound to the president's upper right back and the bullet wound to the back of the president's head were both entry wounds, not exit wounds, and hence the bullets were fired from the rear. Is that correct?
Yes.
Dr. Wecht, in a 1974 article for Forensic Science, did you say this? So far as the available medical evidence shows, all shots were fired from the rear. No support can be found for theories which postulate gunmen to the front or right front of the presidential car. Did you write those words, Doctor?
Yes, exactly. Okay. Available medical evidence. That's the phrase, Mr. Bugliosi. Available medical evidence.
If the bullet was coming on a downward path as it entered the presidential limousine, as you say it was, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And it missed Governor Connally, why didn't it hit the driver of the car or do any damage to the car, Doctor?
A couple of things. The straight line in that open limousine could have taken it out over the left side of the car.
No.
And as the line shows, it would have and could have indeed missed the driver. Secondly,
it's coming on a downward path into the presidential limousine, goes through the president's body, misses Governor Connally, and magically also misses the driver and doesn't do any damage to the presidential limousine.
Wait just a moment. I did not say that bullet missed all of these people completely or that it missed the car.
Well, whom did it
You
miss?
know that there were fragments found in the car, Mr. Bugliosi.
You said the bullet passed on a straight line through the president's body.
Absolutely.
Passed through soft tissue.
That's
so
right.
So that bullet came out pristine.
That's right.
The bullet fragments found in the front seat of this car, Doctor, were bullet fragments, very, very damaged, very, very small. What happened to that pristine bullet when it came through President Kennedy's body? You've suggested, Doctor, that maybe the bullets that entered from the right front, if there were any bullets from the right front, were synchronized, right? That at the very moment that the bullet was fired from the rear, someone else may have fired from the side or the right front. Is that correct?
Yes. A bullet, sir.
Yeah.
A
Now,
bullet.
how would the synchronization have taken place, Doctor?
Oh, that's very simple.
Was someone looking at a stopwatch with a rifle and also looking through the
crosshairs? You can do
crosshairs?
it according to a point in time. You can do it from a prearranged signal. You can do it with a stopwatch.
So they would be looking at the stopwatch and holding the rifle and at the same time looking through their sights. Is that correct?
In whatever way it's done. I haven't done much shooting like that
Have
recently.
you thought about it, Doctor?
Yes, I've thought about it.
Because
not a problem.
Okay,
not a problem with the right kind of watch and shooting with a good weapon. Not a problem.
Because it would have had to have hit within 1/18th of a second. Is that correct?
Yes.
You agree with that?
I agree. Well, not necessarily with 1/18th, but I agree within a fraction and a small fraction of a second. Yes, I do agree.
Extremely, extremely remote. Isn't that right, Doctor?
I would say that it is a remote possibility, but a physical possibility to be considered.
By definition, it seems to me that you are saying that if the other 8 pathologists disagreed with you, and they did, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Seems to me, Doctor, that by necessary implication, they are either hopelessly and utterly incompetent or they deliberately suppress the truth from the American public. Is that correct?
There is a third alternative, which would be a hybrid to some extent of the deliberate suppression, sir. To some extent, a subconscious desire not to injure or aggrieve the government from whom they look for various research grants and appointments and lectureships at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology and a variety of other...
Who are some of these other doctors? Aren't they doctors of good reputation and standing in the medical community?
You bring them here, sir, and present them to the jury. I can only present my testimony, show the pictures for His Honor and the jury.
The 9 pathologists, Dr. Weck, you're the only one that had the honor and the integrity and the professional responsibility to tell the truth to the American people. Is that correct, Doctor?
Well, here it is for you, fans. Unfortunately, Dr. Wecht is wrong. To a high probability, the magic bullet theory is right for a very simple reason that you're never going to hear anywhere else. This is the first time you're probably going to hear this. Forget President Kennedy. How was Governor Connally shot? No one has ever developed a good story for that. Think about it. To explain Governor Connally's wounds, he would have had to have been shot simultaneously with President Kennedy, or at least within 3 seconds. The film shows that. He would have had to have been shot from behind because the entrance wound is in the back and there's no exit wound. The caliber and the trajectory of the bullet would have had to have been the same as that of Kennedy. Connally had 3 documented wounds, so either the bullet ricocheted or there was more than one bullet, yet no other bullets were ever recovered. Put it all together, a simultaneous shooter from the back, same caliber bullet, same ricochet, same trajectory, no bullets ever recovered, just couldn't happen. And as Sherlock Holmes says, when you've eliminated the impossible, what's left, no matter how improbable, is the truth. Remember that the next time someone tells you the magic bullet theory can't be right. No one's ever explained how John Connally was shot otherwise. I'll tell you one more quick Arlen Specter story about the Warren Commission. He had access to Kennedy's body and the clothing he was wearing. When Kennedy was shot, he was wearing a custom-made milk-boat white shirt, very expensive, made on Fifth Avenue in New York by a private tailor. Before the Warren Commission report was published, Specter was in Manhattan with his wife, stopped by that tailor shop, priced the exact type of shirt that John Kennedy was wearing. It was $30, too expensive for him, but he asked the tailor, "So how long were you making clothes for John Kennedy?" At first the tailor professed ignorance, then gave Specter a stare and said, "How could you possibly have known that?" So that's Arlen Specter. I want to thank my producer Sid Tepps, and I want to close tonight with a song that was written on November 22nd, 1963. It was written by Brian Wilson with Mike Love's help. They wrote it after they heard the news that President Kennedy was killed, and it's one of the saddest Beach Boys songs you'll ever hear. Like all of us who heard the news that day, they were shocked and grief-stricken, and they fell back on the only thing they knew, the warmth of the sun.
What good is